What is good, Tesla family? It's Ray J back with another video, and in this one I'm going to be talking about still winning only Tesla stock and what you should be looking after for the future. I'm also going to break down what the technicals are telling us about Tesla and SPY and the QQQ and many tickers out there. I'm going to talk about Neo and Nvda and Apple as well. Break down what's going on with the Bank of Canada and why that caused the market to sell off a bit, and what the technicals are telling us now given that news. I'm going to talk about what the news is saying about Tesla, what's going on with the data, and how this could affect the share price for tomorrow and beyond. But before I do anything like that, before I get into any more details, let me just mention a couple of things before starting. Firstly, I am not a financial planner. Make sure you take none of this as financial advice whatsoever. And also, if you guys can, please smash the like button if you want to see more videos like this. It not only benefits me, it benefits the entire community as a whole. The last thing is, if you guys can, please check out the Moomoo link down below and in the description. If you sign up for Moomoo, the link down below, and deposit $100 into the account, you're guaranteed 5 free stocks plus $100 in cash as a reward. Put in $1,000, you're guaranteed to 10 free stocks. If you put in $5,000, you're guaranteed 1 free Tesla or Google stock, plus all of these other rewards. The offer ends very soon. Please check it out before they run out in just a couple of weeks. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. All right, so what's going on with Tesla right now? One of the things I told you guys in my earlier videos was the market was going to make a very big move. I told you guys that in the morning, Tesla made a very explosive move to the upside. Then after that, I told you that there were some bearish signals on Tesla, and we did see Tesla sell off a little bit more after that. I told you guys around this level right here, Tesla was hovering around this like 226 zone. And then Tesla closed at around 224.5, and it continued to drop in the after hours. Now, overall, Tesla got this nice drop, but we're going to be watching for confirmation of whether or not this will continue into tomorrow. And the odds are favoring it looking at the 1 hour and the 4 hour as the bearish momentum is getting stronger, but it's going to be dictated by the QQQ. And so far, yes, the bears are getting a bit of an edge. Now, when it comes to the future for the markets, there are going to be other things to look at that are super important. I want to just note that GME had earnings right now. They are going to be replacing their CEO, and they didn't do too well for earnings because their margins got a hit given the current economic recessionary environment that we are getting very close to. Now, GME, I believe they beat on EPS, but they missed on revenue. And with the new CEO, GME is taking a big hit. Now, for tomorrow, we have DocuSign, just a couple of other earnings. But for Friday, is going to be a bigger day for earnings, in my opinion, because of Neo. I watch Neo a lot, so that's why it's bigger in my eyes. And this is going to be a very interesting play. Neo is very tight right now, and it's going to be making a big move very soon. For the data coming out, we have initial jobless claims coming out tomorrow morning, so make sure you're open minded for that. It's going to cause somewhat of a reaction for the markets, maybe not as significant as before. Then we have wholesale inventories coming out month over month. This is going to be very important for understanding supply chains and things like that. So I do expect a reaction around 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern time, but I don't think it's going to be that significant. So I'm not seeing too much significant data coming out. And then going into next week is when things go crazy. We have lots of consumer sentiment data coming out for Monday. Then we have CPI and FOMC all during the same week. So next week is going to be wild. This is kind of like the calm before the storm. So please enjoy it while it lasts. Now, why did the market sell off? Well, there's another reason for this. It wasn't just the technicals and the market just being due for a pullback. It was also because of the Bank of Canada raising rates even higher than what many analysts were expecting to 4.75%, the highest over there in 22 years. This, in turn, is putting some pressure on the Fed to either match this or respond to this because it's going to have a big effect on the US markets. Now, typically, what tends to happen is the Bank of Canada reacts to the US or they tend to respond very similarly. This time, they made their move first, so now we're going to see how the US responds during FOMC in just a couple of trading days. It's going to happen next week, I believe on Wednesday, so please be ready for that. Expect lots of volatility. Now, as far as Tesla goes, there's been after what Mr. Elon Musk said. So going down right here, you could see there's been a lot of talk about the FSD and some very big updates. There was an announcement by Elon Musk about the possibility of licensing autopilot and FSD to automakers from that are not Tesla, basically. That in turn, I mean, I would consider that very interesting news, but it really shows how committed Tesla is to its vision. On top of that, there was a lot of news about how Tesla's qualifying for many of these EV tax write-offs, especially for the Model 3. So I'm sorry, tax credits. Those specifically are helping it becoming cheaper than many of its competitors, which is technically good for it. Then moving forward, let's now come down here where we're seeing more updates being made to Tesla's different parts. We're seeing a new software update that's coming up very soon. New features are going to be coming out. They're going to be enhancing their braking effects moving forward. There was also new talk about the seatbelt features right here on the service menu to get some updates. So new updates are coming to the FSD, which is great about Tesla. To add on to this, there was new news that came out about how Tesla hit the 2023 high, hitting that 230 resistance. But as great as that was, Tesla did not manage to hold above it for too long, and it got a nice rejection from there. Despite that, it's very good progress Tesla's making. And I never said Tesla's going to crash very hard from these levels. I know some people misinterpret what I say. That's completely understandable. There was also a lot of people talking about how I sold my Tesla shares. That's not true. I never sold a single Tesla share. When I mentioned me selling positions, I was talking about exiting calls and just liquidating my trading account for the weekend. That's a trading account, not an investment account. I did that like last week on Friday. I mean, sometimes I don't even want to talk about it, but I did that because I didn't want to hold anything over the weekend. I have not sold my Tesla shares. It's just a rumor made up by some people who misinterpreted my words. But anyways, there was more news that came out involving Tesla. We could see Tesla Rati was stating that Tesla may finally enter Tesla may finally enter India, and this could be their establishment of a vendor base. Now, why is it saying this? Because when you go down here, it states that Tesla has apparently been asking Indian officials to put together a plan of what it might look like and submit it in 3 to 6 months for a plan for Tesla to open its main vendor base over there. That's some good stuff in my opinion. Tesla's also making plans for the local supply chains and resources in India and trying to use them for their supplies. That is once again some good news as progress is being made, and we're getting closer and closer to some announcement like this. However, it's not 100% confirmed, so I wouldn't necessarily count on this or like depend on this news. But I just want to note progress is being made. It is technically optimistic for Tesla. Now, as far as inventory levels go, there's not much change for the models. The Model X listings did go up a little bit. Everything else is very low though, except for the Model 3. And it looks like we're just waiting for the new updated version of it. But for now, I don't like to see high Model 3 inventory levels. Tesla has been working to bring this down. It went down just a little bit, but overall, a little bit high. So we're going to see what happens during Tesla's next deliveries report. Still waiting to see the reaction we get from the Model 3 once the updated version comes out. And until then, we'll just have to be patient. Tesla got a big surge in volume and it pumped because of the news that came out that it's 100% official that Elon Musk will not be the Twitter CEO. Linda, the new CEO that Elon Musk appointed, started working yesterday, and Tesla loved it. It pumped like crazy during the after hours yesterday, then during the pre market today. But then after that, Tesla started to slow down with the market, especially because of the QQQ selling off. And that is why we saw Tesla slow down alongside the QQQ. Good volume on Tesla, that's very awesome to see, but it's going to be dictated by the market, and you have to be careful right there. Short volume on Tesla was a little bit high relative to price. Shorts did pile in again. We're going to be looking at this data carefully moving forward. The price price ratio is very flat for Tesla, a little bit high, so Tesla was outperforming. But let's be careful with this claim now because things could change starting tomorrow once you see the technicals on Tesla. Lots of resistance was up here, looking at the intraday net volume nodes right over here. Lots and lots of resistance, and we saw Tesla get rejected around this level. Now, Barclays is saying that they're reiterating that Tesla is going to outperform the markets. Citigroup is pretty neutral on Tesla, and Wedbush is saying the same thing. They're very bullish on Tesla. It's going to outperform. So that's awesome to see. Now, historically, Thursdays tend to be one of the weakest days of the week for Tesla. It's only green. Excuse me, sorry guys. Need to clear my throat. Sorry. When it comes to Tesla, it's only green about 48% of the time on Thursdays. So not very strong for Tesla standards. So be very careful tomorrow. June in particular tends to be strong for Tesla. And for the first week, Tesla has been pretty strong, pumping very high to the newest high of 2023. But after that, after this week, I mean, things could slow down, especially starting tomorrow once you see the technicals. It tends to be very strong during the second and fourth hours of the day. We saw it pump very hard during the open, but it slowed down a little bit afterwards, and we could see something like that continue. Now, as far as the short interest goes, we saw this decrease just a little bit. Only 49 million Tesla shares were shorted the last time this came out just 2 days ago, compared to the last report that came out just on, I think it was Friday, where we saw over 55 million. So a slight decrease now. We saw some short covering that helped Tesla pump a bit. And this is likely going to show a bigger drop moving forward because of how much Tesla pumped from there. But now let's talk about the technicals very briefly. I'm going to try to get through this part quicker. So for SPY, I told you guys that there could be downside coming, okay? But I told you to be careful with those 0 day to expiration options. Be very careful with those because it could take a while for this thing to actually start to see the downside. We need confirmation with a break below 426. However, I told you the odds do favor it eventually getting that break to the downside. It's more likely to happen given these technicals. We're still looking very weak on the 1 hour. The 4 hours looking even weaker on SPY, at least for now. But to get the bigger move to the downside, you got to break below 426. For now, it seems very likely it's going to happen. I just don't know exactly when. It could range trade a bit like tomorrow and then not happen until like next week or by Friday. Or it could happen as soon as tomorrow, depending on how we open and how we respond to initial jobless claims. But just know for now, looking at the trend, the bears are gaining control right now. The bears are getting stronger, and this trend is favoring them a bit more. However, SPY is looking stronger than many stocks out there. Especially on the tech side and consumer discretionaries and the QQQs. And I want to just note that SPY has a little bit more strength, but we're seeing more weakness on the tech side. Netflix got this nice pump. I called this out in the morning. But then I told you to watch these levels. It's like 410, 404, 400 zone. And it broke below almost everything, very close to where I told you the major support was. Broke just barely below it. And now for Netflix, you're going to be watching this like 397, 395, 390 support. 390.36 is where the 4-hour 50 EMA happens to be. So watch that carefully. The trend right now is favoring the bears a little bit more. It had this bearish divergence that developed, and also the MACD is favoring the bears. For Tesla, here's what's going on with Tesla, okay? On the 1 hour time frame, let's just clean this up a little bit when I show you this. On the 1 hour, Tesla is starting to look a little bit more bearish from this crossover here. This is not guaranteed it has to open this way. It's just showing as of right now. It is dropping in the after hours, showing some weakness. It pumped very hard, then got this rejection. What else is worth noting is when you look at the trend like this is looking like a left shoulder, a head, and a potential right shoulder that could be forming on Tesla. And if Tesla does end up breaking below the low it made today, below 223 to 222.74, if it breaks that, you're going to be watching this support at the 50 EMA at 220.74 to 220. Watch that very carefully. That's very close to this chop zone right here. So between like 220 to 221. Watch that very carefully. We may see Tesla make its way down here to complete this head and shoulders. Now, if we're bullish on Tesla, just hypothetically, okay, let's just say a new piece of news comes out. We're going to be watching resistance around this 224.69 to 225 zone. If it breaks that, it could make its way up to 227. However, looking at the charts and looking at the QQQ, the odds are favoring that Tesla may continue to just trade sideways tomorrow and then start downtrending and retest 220 to 221. Now, it could try to hold here because we have the 50 EMA as support. I'm not too sure if it's going to break this or hold it, but I do believe there's a high probability it may test into this level, drop a little bit more and then test it. If it breaks it, then you're going to be watching this 218 support. If it holds it, it could chop around and just try to trade sideways between 220 and 223. But I am leaning more towards there being a little bit more downside for Tesla before it tries to base and see some buyers step in. Then we're going to see if they have enough momentum to hold it. We have to watch it carefully. Now, there's another reason why I'm saying this, and that's because of the QQQ. The QQQ is looking quite weak overall. It's very close to major support around the 1 hour 200 EMA at 346.91. Now, in my video that I released earlier, I told you guys the QQQ in particular is looking even weaker. And you guys remember the confirmation I've been talking about for so many days on the QQQ, right? I was telling you guys, watch the QQQ. If we're bullish, it needs to break and hold 356. We had a fake breakout, but then it came right back down. Then you had to watch support. Then I told you, if the QQQ breaks 354, watch this really choppy like support zone between 354 to 353. If 353 broke on the QQQ, I warned you so many times, this thing is going to come tanking down to 350. I told you, and look what happened. Exactly as planned, it came all the way down to 350. Actually, 349 to 350, this entire zone, so lots of chop. And then I released the video and I talked about this like right around this period, and I told you guys it's still looking pretty bearish. And I told you it could still come down closer to like the mid 340s. It came all the way down to 347, so very close to my targets. I was correct about it coming down. Am I always correct? No, I'm a human. I make mistakes, guys. I'm not always right, but there have been a lot of times I've been correct. I just wanted to let you guys know that. But once again, do not solely invest based off what I say. I'm not giving any financial advice on this channel. I just love to give you guys updates and help you as much as I can. I love to help you guys. I would love to give you guys as much support and provide you guys with knowledge. And really hope it benefits you. I really hope you guys like it. But anyways, the QQQ came down. We saw some chop between 349 to 350. Then it ended up breaking even lower and came very close to the 200 EMA. Then it bounced very close to that and managed to just trade sideways from there. Now the problem with the QQQ is we had this head and shoulders, right? I was talking about how there's a possible head and shoulders, and for confirmation, I had to break 353, so we got the confirmation of it. And the bottom of it happens to be closer to like the 346.5 area. So there is a possibility this thing may drop a little bit more, closer to 346.5. If that's the case, that could drag Tesla down and take a little bit lower before we see any sort of bounce. And there's a possibility that if we do drop to 346.5, we could be forming another head and shoulders. I know this is kind of complicated, so it could come down a little bit, but then we could get a bounce if we have like a left shoulder here, like a head, and then like the right shoulder that forms like one small bounce, and then it just ends up dropping even lower. I'm not really counting on a big bounce like that because the technicals look pretty weak as of right now. We're not really seeing that. I don't know if like FOMC is going to cause like some volatility and that's going to cause. I just don't really know. But if anything, the odds favor that if this thing breaks below 346.5 and then 345, it's going to come pretty hard to the downside to 340. We have this imbalance down here. I know it's a little hard to see. See this imbalance? It's going to come all the way down here if we get the confirmation of the break to the downside. So that's why you got to watch that carefully on the QQQ. It's looking a lot weaker than SPY. It might try to either hold the 4-hour 50 EMA or even 346.5. I'm thinking it's going to drop a little bit lower and then try to base around here because it's still looking very weak in the after hours, and this might affect Tesla. But then, even if Tesla drops a little bit later on tomorrow, retest like 221 or so, the QQQ could still see more downside later. I've never said on this channel that all the downside has to happen tomorrow. So you have to be patient, okay? It could take a little bit longer before we get even more downside like next week. So, like I said before, you got to watch for confirmation and be patient. If this thing does start to show more signs of downside either tomorrow or by like next week, that's going to slow Tesla down and that's going to be your confirmation. But for now, just be patient and just know that the odds favor the downside either as soon as tomorrow or a little bit later. It's got to be one of those two. So watch support and resistance. Watch 346.5. If that fails, you're going to be watching 345. And if that fails, there's a good chance 340 could come quickly. If it bounces, you're going to be watching resistance at 350, 350.8, followed by 35. This is like the 352 area, then 353, and this entire zone. I don't see it coming all the way up to 353. I think it might just get a small bounce and then end up just chopping around for some time before more downside comes eventually. But for now, the trend, the bigger moves in this trend are favoring the downside. I think it's very important that we should know this. On the HYG, if you're looking at the HYG, there's this head and shoulders like formation. It's coming down. If it breaks below the low, it could drop a little lower. And if that's the case, that's going to be bearish for the markets. Got to watch that very carefully. For Neo right now is very tight. It's getting very, very tight, forming this wedge. There's a good chance it's going to break to the upside either tomorrow or after earnings. High probability. I'm not promising it. I'm not guaranteeing it. So don't just go all in on Neo. Make sure you manage risks, non financial advice. I'm going to manage risks, of course, but I just want to note that there's a good chance this setup may play out because it has a nice inverse head and shoulders, a cup and handle, an accumulation, and some very, very bullish signals like this bullish divergence that should help this thing push above 8.2. I told you guys yesterday it's going to get a push up probably close to 8 soon. It touched 7.97, came very close today, and it's still looking pretty primed in my opinion. Okay, it may slow down a little bit thanks to the QQQ and the Nasdaq, but eventually it still has the potential. The Nasdaq in itself is once again weakening a bit. I told you guys this yesterday. We have this. What is this? We have this gap right over here that it came down to fill this gap. Could try to see a small bounce, but if it continues to break down, you're going to be watching this 13,000 area. It's getting closer to that support. If that gets tested, that could still lead to more downside for tech as it's still looking weak. On SPX, it's showing some signs of weakness on the 4-hour. We're about to get a bearish crossover right over here. And on top of that, we have this bearish divergence right over here on the chart. It's a little bit hard to see for a lot of people, but this bearish divergence is still relevant. So make sure you watch this carefully. If the bearish divergence develops, right, this could lead to a large rejection, and this rejection could lead to more downside. Now, if we get this crossover right over here, that could also slow down this chart. You're going to be watching for confirmation. Could this thing break below 4260 in a very flat and very strong manner? If that's the case, you're going to be watching the next support zone very close to right here around this 4240 area, which is a little bit lower than uh, 424 on SPY, a little bit lower than that. There's a gap down here, and that gap is likely going to get filled and drag the market down if it breaks below that support. So I'm just calling that out on SPX. For the VIX, there's a small bullish divergence developing. It's just very small on the 1 hour time frame. There's no confirmation of it bouncing yet, but if it does bounce, it's going to be because of the market sliding. There is a possibility, we could see it on the MACD, that it could be developing, but there's no sign of a bounce yet, so we have to wait for confirmation. The SQQQ is a little bit stronger. I told you guys in my video, I think this thing is going to approach 23. Where did it go to? 22.96, very close, off by 4 cents. Very, very close to what I predicted. It looks like there is this inverse head and shoulders like formation, has a little bit more room for upside, so maybe the QQQ drops a little bit because of this pumping a bit. That's a possibility, but there's no confirmation yet, and 23 is going to act as resistance. If it breaks 23, watch the 200 for 23.38 or a little bit around it, depending on where it opens at. The dollar keeps pumping. That could become bearish for the markets. It's trading sideways, so there's no confirmation yet. Not really doing anything, so we'll just have to be patient with that. For Coinbase, if we're bullish, we're going to be watching this thing break all the way up to 54. If it holds it, 55 is going to be resistance, then 58. If it fails to break and hold 54, it could get a rejection and make its way closer to 50 flat. So watch those levels carefully. Then we have Aapl. Apple's pretty flat. If we're bullish, we're going to be watching at 178. If it breaks that, 179.07, then 180. If it breaks and holds 180, watch 181.21, then 182.5. Now for bearish, it's going to have to break and hold below the 200 EMA on the hourly. If that happens, it's going to come all the way down to 175. So watch that level very carefully. If that's the case, you have to be very, very cautious with Aapl. If Aapl does break down, that's going to be bearish for the markets. But for now, the trend is in the middle. We're forming a small bullish divergence, so it could try to bounce, but that's not a guarantee, and there's no confirmation of it, right? There's no confirmation, and the trend is still favoring the bears a bit more. So we'll have to see how it opens. It's very much in the middle for now, but on the 4 hour, it's still looking very weak. There's no sign of the bounce. The bigger trend is still more bearish. So even though in the small time frame there's that small bullish divergence, it's very minor, and on the bigger time frame, it's still looking weaker. So like I said before, we need to see how it reacts to this 50 EMA. It's just barely above it for now. If it breaks below it, that's going to cause the market to drop more. If it manages to hold it, the market may shop around for a little bit longer and then see downside a little bit later. If that comes, it may take a little bit longer. For Nvda, I told you guys it's likely going to come down to about, this thing was around 381 when I was watching or recording the video, the second one I just released. Uh, After that, I told you, watch 377. If that failed, it's going to get closer to 375, then potentially the 4 hour 50 EMA. That is where this thing tried to bounce. A little bit below it, came very close to doing so. Uh, Now, if this thing manages to bounce here, I mean, it could get a retest of about 381, but it's just not looking that great because the trend is still heavily in favor of the bears, and I don't have any confirmation to make any claims yet. So I don't have enough data to say too much about NVIDIA. I'd rather just be patient. For Amazon, so far it's dropping. If it breaks below the low it made today, we're going to be watching 120, then the 119.17 area. If 119.17 fails, it has potential to come all the way down to about 117, then potentially around 114. If we're bullish on Amazon, we're going to be looking for a bounce and a retest of this 123 area, then 125, then 127.45. I think Amazon might try to bounce a little bit. It is kind of oversold on the smaller time frames. But then again, if the QQQ fails on us, it could just get a small bounce and reject. And if it breaks the low of the day, that's going to be your confirmation of it coming down to like the 119s. No sign of a bounce just yet. I'm going to talk about Google in a second. I kind of skipped it. Meta is looking relatively weak. There's no sign of a bounce. And I told you guys yesterday, if Meta broke below 269, that's your confirmation. It's going to come down to the mid to low 260s. And that's exactly what happened. The trend line I told you was very important. It held. So now if Meta wants to bounce off this, I mean, it is well below these levels in the after hours. It's still looking very weak. There's no sign of a bounce in the 4 hour. It could try to get a backtest of the 50 EMA, but like I said, there's no sign of strength just yet. So it could be on its way to 258. So watch that carefully. If it breaks below that, there's going to be more downside, but I'm hoping that it doesn't break that high. The 10-year Treasury yield is starting to pump a little bit. This is typically a bearish signal for the markets, but this has not been performing normally, so I'm not really going to be paying too much attention to this. I think because of the debt ceiling getting in the way, it's affecting this. But for now, I mean, if this were to perform normally, this would be a bearish signal. It's just that I'm just taking this with a grain of salt. Uh, so we'll see what happens with it. I mean, that could be a red flag, but it's not a guarantee. I just wanted to note that. For Google, we're bullish. You're going to be watching 124.5, 125, then 127. If you're bearish on Google, you're going to be watching 122, 120.75, then finally it getting closer to about this 119.5 area. Google has no sign of a bounce just yet. There is a possibility it may try just for technicals because it's oversold and get a backtest of like 124 before it starts to continue. But if the QQQ continues to drop, which it most likely will in the future, this could mean more downside for Google. But until then, like I said, we have to wait for confirmation on the QQQ and just be very patient. All right, guys, so for Tesla, we could see a little bit more downside. I mean, it is still selling off in the after hours, but I'm going to be watching, okay, if this head and shoulders formation plays out on Tesla, and then how it reacts to these levels. It's very important to watch for that. I'm going to be watching this 220 to 221 zone on Tesla very carefully, and then watch all the support zones I mentioned in my previous videos very carefully as well. I think there's a high probability it's going to test the 50, but once again, be very patient, especially because of the QQQ. It may try to bounce in the morning and just like trade kind of sideways first before we see more downside. So always look at that possibility and just know that right now the technicals are still favoring downside on the 1 hour, the 4 hour at the time I'm recording this, and the head and shoulders that's forming alongside some more sell signals on the QQQ. All right, so the odds are favoring that, but always be open minded and don't forget about support and resistance levels. I went over both the bullish and bearish cases because sometimes unpredictable things could happen, but I told you which direction I'm leaning in, what I think is going to happen. All right, so watch your levels, guys. Thank you all so much for listening. I have some merch if you're interested in buying anything, from a tank top to a hoodie or anything like that. It's your choice. And with that said, I really appreciate every single one of you. Tesla to the moon, because the long term is still incredibly bright for the entire market and also for Tesla. And peace out.